He's the founder of Pro Football Talk. He's on Pro Football Talk Live, co-host with Chris Sims. His latest article, Drew Rosenhaus, Colin Kaepernick should get signed. Is Colin Kaepernick represented by Drew Rosenhaus, his football rights, Mike?
No. Jeff Nally represents Colin Kaepernick and has for several years now. But Rosenhaus, a prominent agent, spoke to NBC News and shared that opinion. And I feel like this time around, more people are speaking openly about what the NFL needs to do as it relates to Colin Kaepernick. And I think we're just waiting to see if one of the 32 teams will do something, bring him in for a workout, negotiate with him on a contract, and maybe add him to the roster now that the mood seems to be a lot different than it was when the blackballing began 3.5 years ago.
Do we know if Kaepernick wants to play if he is going to be a backup quarterback?
Definitely wants to play, definitely willing to be a backup. I think it's going to be a challenge to work out the right contract because from one perspective, you could say, Dan, he should just take whatever he can get, even if it's the minimum salary. From the other perspective, and I think this is part of the notion that the pendulum is swinging the other way, you put Kaepernick's name and number on an NFL jersey of one of the 32 teams, that jersey probably becomes the highest selling jersey immediately, coast to coast. That team develops a national following immediately. You know, teams do the Hard Knocks show because they want to have a national following, and it never happens. This is a way. If you're looking for a national platform, this is the way to do it. So there is value in having him on the team from a business standpoint, whereas 4 years ago, people were afraid to have him on the team from a business standpoint. And also, he's going to help your team get better. We've looked at a lot of the depth charts. And I start with the Houston Texans. Who fits better as the backup to Deshaun Watson given his skill set? A.J. McCarron or Colin Kaepernick? It's that simple. It's a no-brainer. It's Kaepernick, not McCarron.
I thought Kansas City would be a soft landing spot with Andy Reid. You got the most secure player in football in Patrick Mahomes. And I thought, they just won the Super Bowl. You could bring in Colin Kaepernick and Mahomes would welcome that. Because some of these quarterbacks, I wonder if Russell Wilson welcomed Colin Kaepernick. I just don't know what to make of that Pete Carroll story, Mike, because why would a coach call Pete Carroll or somebody in the front office? Pete Carroll didn't spend much time with Colin Kaepernick. I'd be calling Jim Harbaugh or Greg Roman before I'd be calling Pete Carroll. Explain that to me.
Well, and Jim Harbaugh has said publicly on the record, he's on PFT Live and said this a few years ago, Colin Kaepernick will help you win championships with an S, not one, but multiple. But he is a guy that people should be talking to. And the whole Seahawks thing is weird to me. They didn't sign him because they regard him as a starter. Well, why'd you bring him in for a visit then if you were looking for a backup when you regard him as a starter? He never had a workout with the Seahawks. They view him as a starter. I think back in 2017, they had deeper issues on that team. They had guys in that locker room that resented Russell Wilson that maybe would have lined up behind Colin Kaepernick if he was on the team and created a problem as to whether or not maybe Russell Wilson should be benched for Colin Kaepernick. I think that's one of the reasons they steered clear. But why even bring him in if that's the case? That's what's odd about it. But according to Carroll, somebody's doing their due diligence. Somebody's interested. And I really do think that the atmosphere is much different now than it was 3 years ago. And Want to think somebody's going to take a step back and say, hey, there may be a segment of the fan base that isn't happy about this. Well, to hell with them. If they want to huff and puff, go ahead. We've got a lot more people now who will embrace us for giving Colin Kaepernick the chance he's been denied for the last 3 years.
I've seen people speculate on where Colin Kaepernick could end up. And I don't know if you caught my interview with Doug Williams, who works with the Redskins. And I did say, hey, have you guys thought about Colin Kaepernick? And he goes, no, because of President Trump, the military that's in Washington, D.C. And, now I get to your initiative where now we're looking at that nickname for, Washington's team. I don't know if Daniel Snyder would entertain that. I don't know if it would, hey, I can bring in Kaepernick, just let me keep my nickname. I don't know how any of this works, but I don't put it past any of these owners. What do you make of Washington, D.C., first of all, with what Doug Williams said?
Well, if you sign Colin Kaepernick, there's a chance the first thing he says at his introductory press conference is, all right, let's change the nickname. Right? I've been waiting for somebody in that organization to stand up in this moment, Dan. If we are taking a stand against racism in all forms, if they are taking down the Christopher Columbus statue in Richmond, Virginia, where the team has its training camp, the conversation has expanded beyond racism against Black Americans, Native Americans who were shoved out of the way when the Europeans came over 500 plus years ago. Those Native Americans have a seat at this table too. And it's astounding to me. And we've been pushing this for a week and a half now. And I've been hoping and praying that somebody will catch on to it and run with it. And somebody from within the team. I mean, this is a time where it isn't courageous anymore to stand up and say the right thing and do the right thing. And I just keep waiting for whether it's the coach, whether it's one of the players, whether it's somebody to say, hey, you know what? We're taking a stand against racism. This name is a dictionary-defined slur. Now's the time to change it. And I keep waiting and hoping that to make this moment complete and to give the NFL a true way to impact. You know, it's one thing to issue statements and videos and throw money at the problem, and that's fine. That's needed. But if you really want to prove that things are different, NASCAR gets rid of the Confederate flag, the NFL changes the Washington nickname, and repairs Colin Kaepernick, gets him to where he would be right now if he hadn't wrongfully been denied a job the last 3.5 years.
Talking to Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk. Baker Mayfield, J.J. Watt, Bill O'Brien talking about taking a knee here. That's why I go back to, you kind of snuck that in with the Texans might be a great spot here. And knowing your relationship with Bill O'Brien, I wonder if Bill O'Brien, a coach, is going to take a knee. You got a secure quarterback in Deshaun Watson, and you could bring in Colin Kaepernick. Man, that might be able to put a nice little bow on this.
Hey, Dan, it's a no-brainer. And I thought of it last week when I combined the heartfelt message that Bill O'Brien had almost 2 weeks ago when he first addressed the George Floyd murder and his feelings on where things currently stand in the country. Bill O'Brien, who's both the coach and the GM of the Houston Texans. So he doesn't have to say, well, the GM didn't let me sign this guy. He has that authority. He attended the George Floyd funeral last week in Houston. Cal McNair, the owner of the team, was there. And that was the moment when Al Sharpton said, this isn't about putting Colin Kaepernick back to work. It's about repairing him. It's very, the best argument now for not signing Colin Kaepernick is, well, he hasn't played in 3 years. Well, he hasn't played in 3 years because you've frozen him out for 3 years. It's not his fault. And you mentioned the Chiefs. I mean, if Andy Reid is the guy who gave Mike Vick a second chance after 2 years out of football for something he did, why not give Colin Kaepernick? I hate to even use the word second chance. Yeah. Second chance implies there's a need for a second chance. Why not be the one to bring him back after 3 years and give him an opportunity to get to where he otherwise would have been after being wrongfully denied employment the last 3 years?
And speaking to African-American who's still in the NFL, and he said last year, until the white stars get behind this, it won't have the movement, the momentum that we need. And now you're talking about Baker Mayfield and J.J. Watt and, a coach in the NFL who's willing to do this. I get the feeling that you might be in the minority if you're not kneeling on game day. What do you think is going to happen? And I know we got a lot of time before we get to September, but what do you think the sidelines are going to look like?
Well, it's funny. Justin Jackson of the Chargers last week made the comment that there's a chance by the time we get to September, there'll be no need to kneel because the change will be happening to the point where there isn't the importance to bring attention to the problem. But I think as of right now, based upon where we are, based upon where we likely will be in September, there will be a lot of people kneeling. And I loved Baker Mayfield's message because it's the message the NFL should have had from day one. I'm doing the right thing here. And if I lose fans over it, I don't care. The NFL's problem in 2017 is they feared that there would be a segment of the fan base that would turn away from them, and it would affect them in the pocketbook. It would affect them in the TV ratings. And to a certain extent, the Anthem controversy did affect the NFL that year. The world is different, though, this time around. And I think the NFL needs to go back and throw away the playbook from 2017 and recognize that, you know what? First of all, anybody who does refuse to watch football, and a lot of people will say they refuse to watch and still watch, but if they are going to turn away from us, that's their problem. We don't want their business if that's how they think. If they refuse to understand that kneeling during the anthem isn't disrespect of the flag, the military, and the country. And secondly, maybe there is a net gain here, as I said earlier. We sell jerseys. We sell tickets. We develop a national following because we're the ones who stood up and did the right thing.
NBA season opener still on time, but where do we stand with fans in the stands?
Well, look, Dan. I'm concerned about the things that I'm hearing, and I know that the media has moved on to a large extent from the coronavirus. But when you see the spikes in some of these states, and when you see states reopening and nightclubs packed with people and no masks in sight, I'm just concerned that when we get to September, it's going to be impossible to have fans at these games. I just hope that they can come up with procedures and protocols that the union, the league, the coaches, everybody are on the same page about. There's a protocol out there. The union hasn't agreed to it. John Harbaugh was complaining about it last week. They got a lot of work to do to come up with a system that gets everyone on the same page and that keeps the virus off of the playing field, out of the locker room and off of the playing field. That locker room is usually a petri dish, and the playing field is worse. And they better have a good plan, or they're going to get this thing started, and it's going to fall apart by the end of September.
NFL owners on the clock here for that franchise tag. And can you say, I know that it's been Dak Prescott, and I know there are other players there, Ngakoue and A.J. Green here, but is there, like, the worst case scenario for the Cowboys with Dak Prescott is what?
Well, the worst case scenario is they don't get a deal done with him before July 15th, so they can't do a multi-year deal for 2020. Then he holds out of training camp in the preseason and shows up a week before the opener like Le'Veon Bell did 3 years ago. And the Cowboys have to decide, do we go with Andy Dalton, who's ready to go, or do we go with a guy who's just walked through the door? And if they don't do that long-term deal by July 15th, you've got Dak Prescott on the Kirk Cousins plan, where it's $31.4 million this year, $37.8 million next year. 2022, it's either $45 million if they use the transition tag, $54 million if they use the franchise tag a third time, or he walks away into free agency. And see, that's what this comes down to, Dan. It's a very simple analysis. What will the Cowboys offer Dak Prescott to give up $69 million over the next 2 years, plus a shot at free agency like Kirk Cousins got? What will it take to get him to trade that in? That's the challenge, and that's what the Cowboys have to answer. And they have to come up with enough to get him to trade in what he currently has in his hand.
Good to talk to you, Mike. Hope you're well. We appreciate your time as always.
All right, Dan. See you, buddy.
That's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk Live, profootballtalk.com.